You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined once again for the 88th episode by Billy Galanko. How are you, Billy?
Doing well. Yeah, we're closing in on the big 100. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, we'll have some updates hopefully over the coming weeks of little celebratory. What are we doing? We'll put something together for the episode.
Might be like a little giveaway. It'll be basically a thank you to our listeners who have stuck with us and also discovered us over the past couple of years. So
yeah,
it'll be great.
The tens and tens of thousands of listeners that we now have flooding in. We want to do something for y'all.
Thanks to everybody liking and subscribing and sharing.
Yeah.
Reviewing.
Podcasts are hard to grow. And there are a lot of great wine podcasts out there. So yeah, we appreciate our listeners for sure.
Like great wine, it's hard to grow. We just have to have the right terroir here.
That's right. Yeah.
Now we've lost all of our listeners. All right.
Yeah. How was your weekend?
Good. But I want to lead with you. Happy birthday. The birthday boy had a great weekend, I've heard. What did you have to drink?
So I guess the main event was finally got down to visit Sagamore Distillery.
That's awesome.
The distillery is downtown Baltimore, but really leading the Maryland rye revival. And I've gotten into collecting all their different finishing series, like cask finish, single kind of one-off batches and projects that they do with finishing casks. And I've got a bunch of different ones released over the many years, and it's hard to find them. Like they don't just pop up on store shelves, especially in the area. And I went down there and they had two distillery exclusives. One was Albarino cask finish from a Maryland winery, which was cool. And then they had a sour ale finish from a brewery in Maryland. So it was really cool. There's local collaborations and casks that, I've never seen another whiskey finish in Albarino before. I'm sure they're out there, but that was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you were saying that they were not just finished in them. You know, some whiskeys will be finished for a short period of time.
6 or 9 months. Yeah.
Yeah. You spent a long time in there.
The Albarino, I believe, is like a year and a half, and the sour ale was like over 2 years. They do many of their, for instance, their Armagnac finish was 3 years and a month, I believe. So yeah, really long finishing. And these are like usually 4 to 6 year old whiskeys. So to start before they go in the casks.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Yeah. I wonder, a lot of the more time whiskeys spend in a barrel, the more they can seep into the wood. So you not only get some of that character from the previous liquid, but then you also get some of the wood character and then obviously some oxygen over time. So that's really cool. I bet that adds to them.
Yeah, it was a good experience. It was interesting comparing that experience to all the different distillery tours when we were in Kentucky together as a team. It was pretty much the same spiel, but we only did one rye. I guess Angel's Envy was the main kind of rye house that we toured in Kentucky, and Sagamore is all rye. High rye, it's not straight rye or 100% rye. But yeah. So it was pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty.
And then we did dinner on Saturday, which was good, but had my first Chocolina white, which was yummy. And then was given a rosé cava, which I can't remember the producer now. Ramon Canales, I think, let's see.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah, let's see. There's a producer with a very similar name. So that I know that is quality.
Yep, that's right. Ramon Canales Reserva Rosé, Brut Rosé. It was really good.
Nice. I think
Grenache.
Was it a vintage one?
Well, this one I'm looking at here online is vintage, but they just brought it out. I didn't order it off the menu. It was my birthday thing that the restaurant gave me. It was a Basque restaurant, and it looks like Grenache and Pinot Noir. traditional method, 24-month on the lees.
Nice. I
So
mean,
yeah,
I still
it's good.
nice. Yeah, I still hold that Kava offers some of the best value traditional sparkling out there. I think
Oh, for sure.
not many people argue with that, but still, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Kava is usually my choice on by the glass lists if the still wines aren't super compelling. Just go for the $8 glass of Kava. So.
Nice. Well, I want to touch on sparkling colored beverages, I guess we'll say. Sparkling reds. We've kind of briefly touched on them recently, and I've remained on my kick, so I figured I would inform everybody on a little bit more detail, maybe a little bit more in-depth look at Lambrusco. But before we do that, I also had a whiskey experience last week. I have read, and there's an author, highly recommend him, named Dave Broom, spelled just like you would think, an actual broom. He wrote a book called The Way of Whiskey. It has a longer title, but it was basically him driving around Japan. And what he was trying to do is draw a parallel to the craftsmanship culture, the thought and time a lot of Japanese craftsmen put into their goods and the whiskeys that were produced there. And he would drive to different regions to see if there were parallels in how the whiskeys were made in the local craft and the attention to detail, which I thought was a really cool way. That was when I was, a few years ago, working at Vint, trying to learn more about Japanese whiskey as we got deeper into selecting these spirits. So he recently came out with another book. If you're watching on YouTube, I have it here, A Sense of Place.
Nice.
And it was basically a journey around Scotland, and he's Scottish. And basically what he wanted to do there was kind of explore Scotland distilleries in a unique lens, not really trying to go and say these whiskeys have a certain style or each region has a certain distinct style. Because to him, so actually taking one step back, I went to a tasting where he was actually in Los Angeles. So he went through and then he walked us through the regions he went to. And while he was there, we discussed the nuances of the book. And his theory or his assertion is that while some areas like Islay have distinct peat notes, and like their peat is distinct, he was talking about the nuances of peat from different areas. There's certain regions that don't necessarily have a style, but they have a sense of place. So he was saying that's kind of made up between the people, the stuff that goes in, like the whole culture that goes into around there, sustainability, all these other elements, which I thought was really cool. So he drove from Orkney in the far north down to Brora, over to Speyside, and then he went out west to the Isles, like the Hebrides, the Inner Hebrides by the Isle of Skye, down the peninsulas, and ended up at Islay. And I thought it was a pretty cool. I listened to the book. He narrates it, so I highly recommend listening to it because then you get the true Scottish experience. But then the book is full of tons of great photos, and it's from throughout his trip. So I thought that was really neat. Yeah, and it was cool. They had one of the distillers who was featured in the book there to talk about his spirit, which I thought was cool because everything was about single malts during that whole tasting. We had the Glenfiddich 18, but then we had a bunch of, it was put on by the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. So we had a bunch of different independent bottlings of theirs. But this one distillery had 3, it was a triple finished whiskey, or not triple. Yeah, I mean, it was just aged in 3 different casks. So there was like a random type of oak I haven't heard before. It starts with a C. I will tell you what it is. I have all of the notes. And then they finished it in a rye cask, a Chinkapin oak cask. Hadn't heard of that before. And a first fill ex-Bordeaux cask. And that was pretty cool because they just started not too many years ago. So what they were trying to do is offer like a younger spirit with depth and complexity that you might get with age. So they're putting some barrels away to age for a long time. And then they're also offering these as kind of like their initial spirit in addition to some gin. So that was really kind of cool. And he explained the nuances. And their Bordeaux casks were like, he's just to give you an idea of where we're kind of pulling from. We're getting like ex-Chateau Margaux and, Lynch Bage casks. And I'm like, we're going after like quality, like really high quality left bank casks, left bank on purpose. He kind of only briefly touched on that. But
it looks like Chinkapin is just a species of white oak. So
yeah, but I guess it's different than Quercus alba, like the base white oak, or there's another one that
Quercus acuminata.
Yeah, Quercus alba is what's typically known as white oak, and this is like commonly he was mentioning that, but it gives off a little bit different notes. But so yeah, it was cool. Love to kind of taste around. I'm going to be continuing to pursue my whiskey education in different ways, but I thought that was pretty neat, a unique experience to meet the guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get to talk more about Scotch and Japanese whiskey over the coming year because I've been venturing farther into Scotch now too, and Japanese, it's harder, like locally, it's harder to find stuff. So starting with Scotch and then going from there.
Yeah. Part of my side project is researching all the whiskeys, and there's good news on the Nika front. They're going to be importing more of their range of spirits to the US. So
cool.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah, where was I the other day? I saw the widest selection of Nika that I had seen in a store. I think it was actually here it was a place right near my house who has like a massive selection of whiskey in general. Their prices are just not that great. So, but basically anything, like if you really want to pay, you'll go in and you can find whatever you want. So
cool. Well, now moving on to my other recent passion, sparkling red wines. I kind of briefly touched on this. I had a Lambrusco Sobrara last week, and then this week we were at one of our favorite wine bars, and they had a red wine from Germany, a sparkling red wine. It was actually half Dornfelder and half Sylvaner, or not half, but a blend of the two, probably more Dornfelder due to the color. That was pretty cool. And it made me kind of think about sparkling reds that, number one, people should kind of get into them a little bit more. And the next day I had a sparkling Barbera, but it was also from Emilia Romagna. So I wanted to kind of take some time today to explain a little bit more about what Lambrusco is, because not every red wine that comes from Emilia Romagna is Lambrusco, but Lambrusco also is more than just a region. So people might know like Prosecco was originally considered a region, or it is a region, but it was also the name of the grape. And now they've renamed the grape Glera, and the region is just called Prosecco. So right now, Lambrusco still has a region. It has a bunch of different DOCs, but underneath that, there are actually grapes that are called Lambrusco something. They're Lambrusco varieties. Italy. Yeah. So throughout Italy, there's apparently over 60 potential varieties of Lambrusco, and 12 of them are commonly used in Lambrusco today. Well, 12 of them are used, I would say commonly, because there's then another subset of, I would say, what is it? Four, five, six that are actually commonly used. So the two you'll probably see most labeled, and we'll touch through these real quick, are Lambrusco di Sobrara, which is what I mentioned earlier, or Sobara, Cosobara, Sorbara. God, I can't spell. That is probably tends to be more of my favorite styles, although the one I had recently wasn't my favorite because it's a lighter color, lighter body, really high acid, almost drinks kind of like what you were talking about, your sparkling cava.
Yeah.
Then the other one that's really popular is Lambrusco Rosa, which both of these actually have their own DOC. So Lambrusco di Sobara is actually from an area called Sobara. There's also Grasparosa. That's more of like a style. That's just the name of the grape. And it has its own DOC too. The other ones that you may see around, let me get into Grasparosa. Grasparosa is inky, big, dark, rich, almost like chocolatey. So it's bubbly, but it has almost like a frothy head. Like it couldn't be more different than the Sobrara. So that's where people can tend to gravitate toward one or the other. These are all made in a style, I think, to be full spumante, they have to be over 11% alcohol, and to be frizzante, like just slightly bubbly, they have to be over like 10.5. And then what some other people may see is a style called amabile. That's another name as well, but it basically just means like lightly frizzy. That only has to be like 8 or 9%. So that's kind of what
like effervescent.
Yeah. And it tends to be a lot sweeter because to get lower bubbles, they tend to stop the fermentation earlier. So a lot of what Americans know is this amabile style, because the American palate over the years has tend to lean towards the sweet stuff. And then in turn, they kept sending us all the sweetest stuff. So
it seems like there can be a lot of similarities between just staying on like the cava thing. And a lot of times you might see in the rosés, you might see Grenache, like in the one that I was talking about. A lot of similarities to me between Grenache based sparkling rosé and some of those Lambruscos.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting comparison. And most people wouldn't think that because there's a lot of traditional Lambrusco is dry or like maybe slightly off dry. But in America, most people just think it's always going to be sweet. So I think that's an interesting comparison because you're right. It can be closer to that, like a fruity sparkling wine. Just a couple other notes. So I just don't want to skip over all of these. So a couple other Lambrusco varieties to know are, let's see, I had them all written down here. Lambrusco Salamino, whose name kind of refers to the name of its bunches, which are actually in the shape kind of like salami. So that's why they named it Salamino, which is kind of funny.
That's funny.
Lambrusco Marani, which is closer to Parma, and that has elevated tannin and acid as well. Those will be the ones that we'll know now. We'll know the Salamino, Sabrara, Marani, and the Grasparosa. I think that's actually good to start here. But what's kind of interesting is if you look, the other fact that I kind of dug into a little bit more, and I had to know this for my sparkling exam, and I've forgotten, is like Emilia Romagna. If it's just labeled Emilia Romagna Lambrusco, it's not like Lambrusco D something. Like if it's Lambrusco D something, it'll be like from a more subset DOC. It'll be very specific. There'll be certain grapes that can go in and certain yields that can be, the grapes had to be produced. So basically smaller yields tend to be more quality overall. Not always, but that's the general rule. So Emilia Romagna has, I can't remember exactly, but it was like 125, we'll just call them units because it's not going to mean anything to anybody, hectoliters per hectare that can be produced. And then the Modena, this just says Lambrusco de Modena, it had 160 hectoliters per hectare. But so that's kind of something interesting. So if you're looking at your Lambruscos, that just will give you a little bit of insight. So like Modena was probably, not always, but probably higher produced, higher yielding wines, just made for bulk. Lambrusco to like from Emilia Romagna might be a little more nuanced. So it was made in smaller groups, even though 120 hectoliters is still a lot. And then moving down to the other DOCs, there is yet more nuance. So it's not just like this blanket frothy thing that's all the same. There are different varieties, different regions, a lot that can go into a Lambrusco.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's challenging. There's sort of these categories of sparkling wine that people are familiar with. There's champagne and, I've maybe heard of Prosecco before, but there's a lot of other categories and interesting things that are most likely on your local wine shop shelf. This isn't something you really have to go super searching for. And it can be a good change of pace from maybe what folks typically buy.
Well, you may, to get a good one, you may need to search further because like your run-of-the-mill grocery store Lambruscos are probably still going to be closer to...
Store. Okay. Yeah. Well, not grocery stores. I mean, actual wine shop, which is where we always tell people to go shop at. I've noticed that one of my local shops now has a full end cap of natural wines, for instance, which they didn't have before. So I know it's different out where you are, but...
Well, no, I mean, like in mainstream places, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the Lambrusco has always been interesting to me because my very first sommelier exam, my intro level quartermaster sommelier exam, like day 2, I think one of the master somms is just like this, something like is like a Lambrusco. Lambrusco is like, she's in my opinion, it's the most underrated wine. Like Americans have no idea what it is, and everybody just kind of like chuckled at her, and she's like, "No, seriously, I think it is." So it's kind of funny that was a wine that was like, so the quality wines were so limited in terms of availability in the US that even people sitting somm exams were like laughing at this lady, that's just not good at that. And then, so I've spent like years trying to taste as many as possible to figure out, because that was in New York, and that was like in theory where you should have been able to get the most Lambrusco as possible. So it's come a long way in the past, I don't know how many years that's been, almost 10 years. So
nice. Yeah, that's good. Something I was drinking more of earlier this summer, and then got into my like whiskey cocktails kick over the the end part of the summer. I guess it's not the end, it's the middle of the summer, but it feels like it's been a long one.
Yeah, it feels like it just started for us. It was cold the first month and a half. Anyway, back to our weather chat.
Let's introduce our guest today. We kind of buried the lead, we're talking about whiskey and Lambrusco, but William Kelley really is the star of today's show. William Kelley is the deputy editor for Robert Parker's Wine Advocate. He's, the critic review that you'll most often see these days from regions like Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne. He's also reviewing wines of Madeira and English sparkling wines as well. At the top of his game, I think, in terms of his on-the-ground connections that he has to those regions and the producers there, seeking out really high quality, even like small volume producers, bringing them to the forefront and reviewing their wines. And had a lot of great things to say, just in terms of thinking from an educational side of how do we help people understand and appreciate these regions and the nuances of the regions a little bit more. We had great conversations with William.
Yeah. He started in Burgundy and Champagne. He's a bit younger than some of the traditional reviewers. We've actually had him. We've asked a couple master of wine on the show, who they look to in terms of critics of repute, or who they like in terms of their tasting style and I guess, approach to tasting. And William Kelley has come up a number of times, so we really wanted to have him on the show. And then what he's done is he's kind of progressed beyond Burgundy and Champagne, like Brady said, and on to places like Bordeaux. And he's bringing the same mentality. In Burgundy, he actually works some vines, he owns some land, and he really appreciates all the work that goes on in the vineyards and the cellar. So he's been bringing that same approach down to when he does Champagne, but also to Bordeaux, which he's just more recently been getting involved with the Wine Advocate. And he's been among some of the first critics to actually ask to go into the vines and to check out, more of the winemaking process and the viticulture process, as opposed to just, viewing the chateau and doing a giant tasting. So I think you get a lot of insight into how a wine critic approaches things, and kind of a little sense of where he thinks the future of wine tasting should be going. A lot of viticultural stuff, winemaking in Burgundy. What else, Brady?
Yeah.
I feel like we covered like everything humanly possible.
It was cool hearing him talk about his project, just Domaine William Kelley in Pomar in Burgundy. And he's got a small plot there, like Billy said. And yeah, I just appreciate it sometimes feels like two different worlds, like the producer and the artist and the winemaker world versus the critic world, just sometimes feel like super separated in my mind. And he brings those worlds together in a really great way, both in his critical review process and, like you said, being in the vineyards, but also in his approach now to winemaking. I think he has a unique take on it. So it was great to hear from him. I hope you all enjoyed this interview with William Kelley.
All right. We are here with William Kelley. Thank you so much for joining us, William.
Real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we've obviously in our intro kind of hyped you up, give everybody a little bit about your background and why you're here. It was pretty funny. We've spoken with various MWs and other people on the pod. And we always ask them what critics they kind of look to. And a lot of your name has come up many times, and everybody kind of has respect for your approach to tasting, which is great. So
That's
good job.
very gratifying to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. But it would be great to kind of learn how you kind of developed your tasting approach to your palate, like how you kind of got into wine. And then I know you kind of were in Oxford and the wine team, and kind of how your mentors helped shape the way you approach wine.
I think the sort of first encounters I had with great wine were very much, ordinary people. So I was tasting great, memorable bottles that hit that sort of spark of emotion that drags you deeper and deeper into this passion that becomes, in my case, I'm a monomaniacal personality. So I was getting completely obsessed with wine. It's pretty much all I talk about now. I think I have a very limited range of conversation, much to the chagrin of my sort of non-wine friends who have to, find me talking about pre-sulfur levels with winemakers over dinner when they're stuck in between us, So no, it was that sort of classic appreciative tasting of great bottles. I think what changed for me later on was when firstly I started vinifying a little bit and working harvest out of people's fruit, but especially when you're working with your own fruit, suddenly you have to make choices based on your tasting. So you suddenly have a feedback loop, and I think anyone who buys wine has a feedback loop, because they buy bottles and if they're disappointed later, then okay, they suffer for making a mistake. But they don't really have access to necessarily the ways to unpick what went wrong. And when you're in production, you have a feedback loop that's much more connected to choices and to technical decisions. So I think that was very big for me. That was something that because experience is great, but what's the difference between experience and iteration? This is something I talk about quite often. Experience is when there's a feedback loop that corrects your mistakes. Iteration is just doing the same thing. And that can be very pleasurable, but it's not necessarily making you progress as a taster. So there's the reduction side, and then subsequently then there was the viticulture, which was, I was kind of parachuted into managing a couple of parcels in Beaune almost by accident. So it's quite a convoluted story. But I was faced suddenly, with before that vines had been for me landscape, and suddenly there became something you had to do things to them, And I began to now I could walk into a vineyard, so read a vineyard, look at the texture of the soil, the nutritional state of the plants, crop load, how the canopies manage lateral fruits, all these different things. Look at the cluster spacing, elongation or not, all these different things that then trace. And then for me, vinifying afterwards and seeing other people's wines all over France, then have quite a clear sense of what choices viticulturally are going to result in which consequences in the glass. So I think that was those have been the big jump up in quality of my tasting. I was trying to improve as a taster. So I think that's important. It's very easy to get a bit self-satisfied when you're a wine critic with a certain influence over the market, and especially a lot of, producers, especially Bordeaux, trying to make you feel like you're a genius or whatever. But I always want to improve every year. I'm always looking back at what I've done wrong. But my first encounters with wine were very much different from that. I'm very much, as I say, very appreciative, classic, ordinary consumer encounters, just very passionate consumer who definitely was lucky to be exposed to a lot of very old bottles, really well preserved old bottles, things like that. But beyond that, I think pretty classic kind of apprenticeship, if you like.
So were you writing for wine at the same time? You were kind of getting your feet dirty in the vineyard and in the winery, or was it like?
Yeah, it was to pay the bills actually. So I was in the US with a slightly, I was applying for my green card. So I was in a slightly sort of delicate situation with actually having a job in the United States. And so one thing I could do is I could write for the Canton magazine about American wine. So it was a way to kind of keep the lights on at a time when, we were living in sort of pretty hand to mouth existence. Everybody in my family thought I was crazy. What you do, then 7 years at Oxford getting all these fancy degrees, and then you're not earning a salary. Why are you not earning a salary? It's a good question, but I'm glad that I stick with it.
Yeah, no, I think you made the right choice. But my path is not at all like yours, but it kind of is in the same sense. I was in like advertising in New York, and I did the first couple levels of the quartermaster sommelier exams, and I basically came to the same conclusion as you in a roundabout way. It was just like, I can taste, I can learn as much about these, but like, you're telling me the vineyard matters. But I talked to sommeliers all across New York, and nobody knows anything about the vineyard. So I ended up quitting my job there and working at Vintage and just like wandering around the vineyards in Australia as well. Just because I was like, I don't understand how you can talk about wine without really getting your hands dirty, or at least trying to understand what's going on here. So that makes a lot of sense to me, at least, which is really cool. How did you end up deciding you wanted to? Because it's one thing that I personally have passion like in the vineyards and in the winemaking process, but creating your own wine and having to sell it is a whole nother story. That to me, that's like the less pleasurable part. How did you decide to not only, get into it, but also, kind of roll out different bottlings in your own wines?
I think that was my ambition from the start. In fact, I mean, that antedates certainly any interest in wine criticism. I don't know. There was sort of certain styles of wine I was passionate about, and I tasted a lot of these. The real reference point, old Burgundies, Bordeaux's from the post-war period, interwar period, really stuff before a lot of things in my mind went wrong, and a lot of things we do today better than they were done back in the interwar and post-war period. But viticulturally, we're still trying to get back to where we were. I think in a lot of respects, we've had the rise of productive tonal selections and the agrochemical revolution with all the downsides that entails. Just I think a loss of a lot of craftsmanship, sort of savoir-faire about pruning, grafting. You don't meet that many people in the vineyard. It's often even in some of the best parts of Burgundy, you're bumping into your neighbors very often. In my parcels, I see my neighbors maybe once or twice a year, and I'm spending hours and hours there because it's just ridiculously time consuming if you want to work at a very, very high level. And so I guess I was sort of seeing that and seeing some of the sort of producers who remained pretty faithful to a rather old-fashioned way of doing things in the good sense. I'm not talking about old-fashioned sense of like dirty oxidized wines. I'm talking about profound soulful wines that are neither sterile nor aseptic, right? People like Koch, who kept in Marceau doing long lavage on the lees, bottling very gently by hand. These sort of traditional, rather time-consuming processes, because it takes. You in a bottling line, you could bottle Koch's whole production probably in 2 days, and it takes them probably about a month to bottle everything by hand. So it's boring. Some of these things, even it's repetitive manual tasks, but which, when applied very thoughtfully, can create what for me is one of the last remaining great art forms. Because you're talking about, how many people in the world can take something that they grow, create something profoundly emotionally moving, that then have the capacity to travel 50 years through time and are all around the world. That for me is amazing, And so I was always, that always appealed to me. And I guess I had that combination of naivety and arrogance necessary to think that I might have something to contribute to that. I started making one in California, Chenin Blanc in Clarksburg, and I never really thought that it would be possible to make wine in Burgundy. But then things kind of changed. And actually, in some ways, it's maybe easier to make wine and Burgundy in California. Because firstly, everyone wants to buy it. And secondly, it's not quite as closed a place as you would think it is. Yeah.
So what was it during your time in California that you really got your hands on some of these reference point wines that you're talking about? Or, how did that, because that's not everyone's experience.
Mainly at university, honestly.
University.
I understand. I had a very good older friend, a family friend who became a real mentor for me. Of course, Hugo Dunmelon, being a wine writer who's a protege of André Simon's, so direct link to sort of that old school of British wine writers like, Simon, who was actually French, and Harry Ward, people like that were kind of, Hugh Johnson, that sort of circle of people. And he had a cellar that was in complete chaos. I think he'd been divorced twice, flooded once, and moved house 3 times. But there were about 7,500 bottles, and he'd stopped buying wine in the early 80s, more or less. So it was 7,000 or so bottles, mainly from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, early 70s. Those start of the 70s mainly. And so I organized that. So we drank a lot of bottles together, and he gave me some bottles. Still have a few bottles of things that he gave me, which are very special bottles for me. And that was a great apprenticeship in these the things that you don't normally get to taste. I think, especially our generation has huge impediments. Those pecuniary and simply to take. Do those bottles even exist very often anymore? There are not many left. They've been drunk, so we don't have much direct contact. It's almost in the same way that people in the 80s, not many people were drinking pre-phylloxera wines. I think people in the 2020s are not drinking very many wartime wines or wines from the 30s or 1950s even. It's just not common. So I was very lucky to have that. And that definitely has changed the way I see wine. You have to remember something like in Bordeaux, in the Medoc, average yields were below 20 hectolitres per hectare until the early 1960s. Mm-hmm. Right. And so today, the average yield you can regularly crop in Bordeaux is 40, 50, 60 hectolitres per hectare. So we're talking about 3 times high yields. It's a completely different world of viticulture. And maybe that was sometimes because a lot was lost to mildew, but still, it was just a very different world. So having, the old bottles are really like a time machine, and they for me were very thought provoking about, what are we doing today that we could maybe do a bit differently if we remove all the constraints, right? That's the nice thing about Burgundy. You can make wine without any constraints. We'll pay for it.
That's a great plus of Burgundy. I have you ever heard of the book of The Road to Burgundy? Or I believe it's called The Road to Burgundy.
Oh, Ray Walker's book.
Yeah. I didn't know if you were familiar with that.
Yeah, no, I've read it.
Is he? So he makes it sound like pretty soon. And for our listeners, basically, this guy was working in like Northern California, wasn't really into wine at all. Started was drinking some wine with friends, and then he had Burgundy. He turns out he really liked it. He just went whole hog into learning about Burgundy, no other wines. And then I just want to learn about this. And then he moved to Burgundy and basically lived there, and then started trying to make wine. He was buying fruit from people, and I guess it's progressed. And if you know him,
I think I'm afraid it ended rather unhappily, because there was a lot of trouble with investors and wine not being delivered, and convoluted stories with a lot of different versions of the story.
That was what I was going to ask. I was like, he made it
customs, yeah.
Oh, then the first custom, good, because the book ends with, I just got Chambertin. I didn't even know how I got it, and now I'm making. I was like, all right, it can't be that easy. He made it sound like anybody could just get up, because the best part about Burgundy is nothing's added, so I just let it go, and then I have wine. I was like,
I've actually tasted his wines once. Huh? I think the problem he had was more the execution and the business plan, and he was getting the fruit. I mean, I think he was getting the Chambertin from Camus, which is perhaps not the best source of fruit, but he did have Chambertin. There's no question about it. But I think it was more organizational stuff that brought him down, rather than, I think if you kind of had the catch, and you'll see him look at someone like a Shogai or what's it called? There's a Maison Fang, and these guys are coming kind of out of nowhere, and they've got Grand Cru stuff. They're making 50, 60 barrels. Boom. So if you have the seed capital, you can get the fruit. The question is, how good is the fruit? And you kind of have a compelling aesthetic vision that you can actually transmit to the wines beyond just making wine, right? Because are you making appellations, or are you making wine instead? But it's not. That's what I was quite serious when I said the doors are not so closed as you would think. And I imagine even more open now than when Ray was starting back in, I'm supposed to introduce something like, was it 08 or 09 or 10, that sort of era.
Well, that's good to know. I'm not happy.
Money is the impediment. Huh?
Yeah, of course.
To give you some context, like a barrel of Coton Charlemagne this year is about 40,000 euros.
Mm.
Barrel of Premier Cru Premium about 30,000 euros. Gevrey about 7,500. Even Bourgogne Rouge, like not very close to 2,000 a barrel. So you're talking your Coton Charlemagne fruit cost already takes you up to 133 euros a bottle just for the fruit.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of your interest in viticulture and the process of winemaking is what precipitated kind of your interest in these regions: Burgundy, Champagne, maybe even now, Madeira, English sparkling, these kinds of, English sparkling being like an emerging kind of place. Is that the case, that your interest in the vineyard and winemaking kind of drove you to those places, or did the reverse happen?
I think those were the wines that got me the most, especially Burgundy and Bordeaux were the ones that got me interested in wine. So it was kind of logical. And those were the regions where I actually had the most expertise, because I know nothing about a lot of wine regions. I'm relatively specialized. European cool climate regions and North America can do pretty good, but beyond that, I'm not the guy to help you pass a wine list that doesn't have any Bordeaux or Champagne, which I'm more or less fine with, because I think everybody has to specialize, and there's so much emerging. It's far from being elitist, but there's so much emerging stuff in those regions that remains extremely dynamic. In fact, I think critically speaking, a lot of so-called lesser appellations in Burgundy had harder time getting oxygen, as it were, in the media than, say, someone who plants a vineyard no one's ever heard of in a place never had vines before in the middle of Slim Valley or whatever. You can get 100-point score for your third leaf California Chardonnay if you do the right things. But if you're in the Maconnais, you can't get a 100-point score, because you're not in Montchauvet. So in some ways, there was even more to do as well to dynamize things. So I was kind of happy about that, and I thought, once you've seen identity plantings of old vine, Pinot Noir, and Burgundy, and you have a chance to make wine from that, I don't really know why you want to make anything else. But I have a really good friend who's making wine and great wine in Piemonte. He's not from Piemonte originally. He's always telling me that, honestly, I would rather make Gamay in Burgundy than Nebbiolo and Barolo, because it's just such a great place to make wine. So I think,
For folks looking to really kind of gain a deep understanding of a particular wine region, or even go outside of a region, even just a country, do you think it's best to specialize, and especially for just enthusiast drinkers, to, hey, I'm going to, spend all of my time drinking wines from France versus trying to drink everything from everywhere? Do you think there's one approach or another that maybe is best for,
I certainly took that approach. And in terms of really boots on the ground, of spending time investing, obviously, I even moved to Beaune. So I started with Burgundy. I think once you crack Burgundy, and especially if you can devote some time to visiting a place like Burgundy, then the concepts are very extensible to other wine regions. I kind of lament that there are a lot of encyclopedias about Burgundy, in the sense of books that tell you certain chef was born in 1955, and he maybe uses barrels from Francois Ferrer and whatnot. But there are not very many books that give you the sort of heuristics, the mental concepts, the tools and the keys, if you like, to understanding a wine region, whether it be Burgundy or any other region, frankly. So I really at some point want to work on a book here that sort of explains the path from a site, and how a site inflects fruit physiologically in so many different ways. It's talking about material. And then all the farming choices with great illustrations, and then winemaking choices and style, and then looking at the sort of cultural, spiritual history of the region, and how in turn that fascinates and inflects the style of the wines. Because I think those almost doing more maybe case studies than trying to explain every different wine and why it tastes the way it is. Because I really think people, it would be very helpful for a lot of people to have more of those sort of tools for understanding, as opposed to just learning that this vineyard is next to that vineyard, or Souchot is next to, or whatever. It's not okay, fine, but what does that actually mean? There's a lot of information without very much understanding about a lot of wines. So, but if someone really wanted to crack wine, I think you should start with a difficult region, and it doesn't have to be an expensive one. You could really get into top wines of, say, Coachella and Maconnais, and then you'll learn so much about Burgundy that would be completely extensible for the rest of it. Top wines of Chablis as well. You just have to be careful to make sure you're going for producers who work well viticulturally and have, living soils and whatnot. Otherwise, the wines kind of taste like they could ultimately be from anywhere, especially when the vintages are hot.
In Burgundy, I think Burgundy is a great example of a region where you can really take the kind of head knowledge and book knowledge and see a map of the region and then get on the ground, and it just exponentially increases your understanding of how those things work together. That was my first experience, really, like things clicking in my mind of like why it matters that, this vineyard is on this side of the road and this one's on the other side of the road. Right. And that makes a big difference. Yeah, Burgundy was where that happened for me. So I resonate with that.
And I think it's an interesting region because, it's simultaneously the great demonstration of the concept of terroir, and also I wouldn't quite go so far as to say it reduces terroir to the absurd, but it also challenges that concept more than any other region, because you can have one vineyard with reasonably homogeneous soils and uniform soil profiles and exposition, whatever, one climat, and they could be made by 5 or 15 different people, and they all taste different, so what's the taste of the place, And so I think it's actually a false contradiction, but it's very interesting. It really makes you think more than, Chateau Lafite tastes as Chateau Lafite, right? So you don't get to taste Chateau Lafite vinified by Mouton Rothschild and see if it tastes more like Mouton Rothschild or more like Lafite. That doesn't happen in other regions, apart from some parts of Germany. There are definitely other regions where there are crus like that, but Burgundy is the obvious one.
It's funny, as part of our work, our company has kind of two arms. One is more an investment arm where we try to make, wine accessible to folks, be able to invest in. They couldn't afford these bottles. And basically more is like an entryway to get people to be able to interact with these wines in a sense that, to your point, Burgundy is really expensive. So they can interact that way and buy shares and kind of understand what their Domaine Romanée-Conti is. The other side is a marketplace where we actually sell the wines directly to folks. And now I have people calling on behalf of either their clients or their bosses to buy wine. And yesterday, you probably would have gotten a kick out of this. To your point, I can't remember the producer, but this lady called asking for this is her pronunciation, a Poligny Montrachet. And she's my boss wants one of these. He said the producer in this, but then there's 5 Climat that he makes in that vineyard. And I was just like, do you know which one? She's like, no, I just said Poligny Montrachet. And I was just like, well, maybe get back to him and ask him which one, just in case. And I was like, any vintage? He's older than 2020 would be great. And I was like, all right,
we're gonna have was when people asked to buy Montrachet, right?
Yeah. So we
without not realizing that when they mean Poligny, Montrachet.
But so I guess at the same time, while it is for us, it's really exciting and interesting. For some people, that's why it can be intimidating, because also it's hard. Some of these French words are hard to say. How would you say like a good way to ease your way into some of these regions would be, I guess? Is it like, having friends recommend, or is it like, how do you like kind of start diving in without, going first thing on appellations and micro appellations?
Yeah, I think producer is always the better way to go fit and to understand. I think you need to compare wines made by the same person in the same vintage from different places.
What about like negociants? Like if you wanted to start at a really high level, like a not like light tour there, but like a Drouhin or something, like what is that helpful at all?
I mean, I think maybe you look at someone like the domain wines from Bouchard and Perifis in terms of, because they have a larger domain holdings. And so there's a bit more consistency within the range than some of the other negotiations. Shadow also have quite a lot, but Bouchard farm pretty well. But I would tend to focus on trying to get some wines that sort of more or less adjacent or similar sort of sector. Look at Côte de Beaune Reds or a few different wines from the same producer. In that case, if you just want to say Bouchard, by all means, I think that's interesting, because you want to try to isolate some variables and then understand the variables, and then you can proceed to compare different producers of the same vineyard. The more you can isolate, the more you can have meaningful comparisons.
What are some? I was going to wait till the end to ask, but I'm just kind of curious now. In Burgundy, where are some value regions that you're seeing? Are we talking about like fixing, or I can't never say fish? Fisson and Marcenais? Are we talking like value coming from up there, or like further south, like you were saying, close in like in the
Again,
Mackinac?
I would go with, there are definitely really good values to be had in Fisal and in Marseille, but I would always go for a particular producer, because you can buy some terrible, Marseille in the big appellation, you can buy some terrible Marseille. Same with Fisal, there's some terribly made wines, So, and the problem is, as soon as these things get talked about a little bit, prices just go nuts. But someone like Cyril Adouard, Charles Adouard in Marseille makes a really great range of wines that remain very reasonably priced, and a great job in Fisal. I think people know about that for a little while now. But yeah, I think just in terms of pure value, there's some interesting stuff being going on in the appellation. So this is a appellation that's shared between a number of communes. People like Camille Thirier, who started out as a micronegociant, is now becoming a domain. She's bought some vineyards. She works really hard, and wine's really good. In Node-Côte, there's some interesting people like Boris Champy in the Bone, and some interesting producers in the Côte de Nuit as well. As soon as you get out there, really fancy postcodes, a lot of Burgundy is not very expensive. There's great stuff in the back of the day. I mean, you really have to focus in on the right producers, though. I try to write a lot about those producers. I think it's important, but if you just go and buy blindly any given appellation, I think you're guaranteed to be disappointed on it.
Yeah. So you were mentioning, once you get out some of those, I guess the bigger name appellations in Burgundy, there's value. You were also mentioning the same about Bordeaux. Can you mention, or like dive in a little bit about how your approach to both tasting in Burgundy and Bordeaux for work actually is kind of changing, or breaking the mold a little bit, how you're kind of getting out and trying to see what people more on the fringes are doing?
Yeah, what I was used to doing in Burgundy was visiting the producers and tasting the wines and seeing their vineyards, which is a very natural thing to do if you want to understand what you're talking about, it seems to me. And it's also the only way you can do things in Burgundy, precisely because there's no real culture of sending in samples to mass tastings. I mean, people used to do that back in the 80s, 90s, but none of the interesting producers would deign to do it today. And most of the little ones are not organized enough to do it. So really trying to organize a mass tasting with a kind of a regional body is a great way to taste a lot of boring wines, honestly. And I have done it, so I can speak from experience, not just prejudice. So when I came to Bordeaux, it's a novel idea. You visit the producers, right? You visit the wineries. But no, that's not how it was done to a significant degree. It was done by these sort of abattoir tastings of lining up 200 plus samples in a row and knocking them out and spending, a week in the region or 10 days in the region to cover the entire region that way. And that just didn't seem to me to correspond with the way I like to work. I don't think I would have done good work doing that. Wow. Yeah, I honestly don't think it's good to work that way. I will say that. I'm not going to pretend that everyone has a different way of working. If you taste too many wines in a day, tannin accumulates in your palate. You favor higher alcohol, higher pH wines, less good, So let's not pretend that that's not the case. That's also demonstrably true. That's written into the history of Bordeaux over the last 20 years, how the style of Bordeaux, in fact, adapted to make wines to perform well in this kind of context, right? And get the scores that made the wine sell. So this is the whole problem. So I'm not going to be polite. So I went to visit, probably visited about 450 chateaux in my first year covering the wine area, which was, particularly speaking, very tough. I kind of look back at it with a bit of horror, like, why did I spend that much time apart from my family? And so on. But I did do it, and it was very revealing. And I think it's helped to get away from a situation where we were kind of just, the wine press was just validating that these estates that everyone had been loving on for the last 10 years were still good. Some of them were never good. There are others who've been doing better work in the interim who deserve to be at the top. There are some who've slipped. There are some who are viticulturally not where they should be today compared to some of their competitors. You still have some very prominent estates using glyphosate and then just harrowing afterwards, which means you have more superficial rooting, you have less organic matter in the soil, and then they wonder why they have extremely high pH in vintages like 22. So these are the people who are not up to 11. So I hope, everything's very political in Bordeaux. So, but I really try not to fall into the trap of being too diplomatic. People in Bordeaux will laugh when they hear that. But I think it's really important. I mean, what on earth is the point of wine criticism if we don't criticize anything? And if we don't found that criticism by its all knowledge that can only be acquired by us, as opposed to something that anyone on Instagram could do, because people say, oh, the future of wine criticism is in jeopardy because everybody has a platform. I'm not at all worried about that because I'm trying to do work that would be almost impossible for anyone else who wasn't full time and hadn't gone into the detail I've gone into to replicate. I think it's great. And on the contrary, I think the democratization of opinions is fantastic. Everybody can have an opinion. And a lot of collectors have more informed opinions because they drink more of the real stuff than a lot of critics. What critics should be adding is information that collectors can't get.
That's a really interesting point. Like a lot of people are like, won't AI just take over wine tasting and analyze the wine? But like, to your point, you're the one walking in the vineyards. You're talking about how these wines are pruned, what the vineyards look like, and what makes the wine. So it doesn't matter just how it tastes. It's like understanding that whole process, especially as sustainability becomes more prominent. Have you spent more time in vineyards in Champagne as well as than you had in the past?
Yeah. So I'm always trying to keep myself interested. And this year, the big thing was to do the report on the O, which I'm finally finishing up. And I think because it's that much, that is about 2 hours away from Reims also. So people who are going to do a Champagne trip is quite a long, if they're already visiting people in the Montagne de Reims, Côte de Blanc or whatever, it's a long way to go to go visit someone.
It's closer to really Chablis, right?
Yeah, it's equidistant more or less between Beaune and Reims. Yeah, and closer geologically, closer to Chablis and geographically as well. Although driving is complicated because there's no direct route. France is very convenient for driving if you're trying to get from wherever you are to Paris. It's a radial road network, but if you ever want to try to remove within the spider's web, it can be pretty consuming. But no, so that it's never really, people covered Emmanuel de Seine and people covered certainly Cedric Bouchard, but beyond that, the Aube has gotten very short shrift and it's very interesting. It's a young wine region in many respects because pre-war people were making, Gamay and like basically red jug wine for the city of Troyes. They weren't producing very much in the way of champagne. And so it's a relatively young region producing sparkling wines, producing great sparkling wines a bit longer than that. That's done. So it's very dynamic and it doesn't have, you go to Aviz, there are certain ways people make wine in Aviz and he'll give you someone like Celeste to completely turn that on its head. Whereas if you're making wine in Landreville, there's no real Landreville style. No one's going to say, oh, you have to make your wine like this. So that's been exciting. I try to free up sometimes with that. But I have such a volume of work and in some ways that's one of the big challenges. What I really need to do is what I'm very passionate about doing actually is trying to find some more young people to take on at the Wine Advocate to mentor and train up and to harvest people maybe with a production background or a knowledge background rather than the sort of classic NW type background or someone who's worked in another publication. I would really like to hire people who've not worked in other publications, so they haven't learned a particular way of doing things. And I think we're in a profession that needs to renew itself because it's, frankly, why is there not a bigger cadre of middle-aged wine writers today, right? Because there are a lot of old wine writers and then there are a few young wine writers and there's still a lot of old wine writers writing. And there's nothing against being old, but ultimately it is a job that requires a certain amount of sensory acuity. And we all know that the precipitous decline of taste buds that happens after a certain age and it varies from case to case. But I don't really see the interest in having 80-year-olds assessing huge numbers of wines. Sensorially, older people have a lot of things to bring. And me first to acknowledge that older mentors have been hugely important for me in my life. And I know some people in their 70s that still taste with incredible precision. But it's just a body of work and a profession. It's much better to have people in their mid-30s, 40s doing it. But nobody has those jobs because the people at the top, I think, kind of suppressed any competition for the last 30 years. And so we kind of we're going to have a sort of situation soon when people have to retire and then there's just going to be a lot of young people who don't necessarily have much in the way of experience with the reference point wines. And we're in a sort of perilous situation. So I think we need to address that. We can't just, I think the days of just going around poaching people from other publications in a sort of rather incestuous circle have to be broken. So if anyone listening to this is a young person with a production background who wants to write about wine, drop me an email.
Yeah, you're about to poach Billy. You're about to poach Billy from us. He's right here.
Hey, you see it in my eyes.
It's super important. It's super important that this starts to happen. So I'm trying to devote more of my time to looking at that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question I wanted to ask, sort of about vintage variation across some of these regions, because I think for enthusiasts especially, I mean, I'll just speak about the States because that's my experience. And for me, a approach I often took in these old world regions was to kind of, look at vintage charts and critical reviews on vintages of a particular region. And then if I didn't know the region well, I would select wines based on, a vintage that got a good score and a producer that I knew was quality as a way of acquiring wines. First, what do you think of that approach generally as a way of exploring some of these regions? And second, can you talk a little bit about vintage variation, how it is that some producers can make great wine in quote unquote bad vintages, and even vice versa can happen, where sometimes these great vintages and producers sort of botch the process?
Yeah, I think the two questions are very related for me, actually. It's just looking at my experience, I would say if you're prepared to accept your production cost of, over 30 euros a bottle, you should be able to make great wine every year in Burgundy. And that's a very high production cost, right? But if you're prepared to, that's enough of a budget to the manual labor, the treatments, the soil work, everything that's required. That means you do not any longer have to submit to this concept of vintage, meaning something to the quality of the wine as opposed to its style.
So $75 to $90 plus for retail, for retail here.
Yeah, probably
should
not.
Expect
in reality more. We're talking Burgundy. Just to give you the example, I mean, I did right now, me and my friend are going through removing all of these shoulders from every single grape cluster in my vineyards and removing every single hail impacted berry. Now, it takes hours and hours, but if you were prepared to do that, and you can sell wines for prices that completely justify that work. If you're prepared to do things like that, or do the treatments when you do the treatment on a Sunday night, in the rain, whatever, you do what needs to be done, you can get over the finish line and you can make great wines. I think today, actually, we're more often seeing this sort of situations where we have this beautiful fruit in these vintages with no kind of sanitary issues whatsoever, and then the wines aren't that exciting. And why is that? I spend more time thinking about that, actually, because I think, we have these, it gets back to, firstly, there's viticultural adaptations to be done. I've talked about this a lot, and I think other people talk about them a bit more now, more and more. Producers talk about them, so that's good. We're all agreed about that. But what about the technical adaptations in the cellar? A lot of places like Burgundy, for example, the traditional winemaking practice is largely adapted towards making lean wines richer. So what if you have naturally rich wines? Do you really want to be doing exactly the same thing? And how do you remain true to your sort of particular aesthetic that you're going for, your traditional style that you like, and also sort of artisanal values, while adapting the right parts of your process to keep the wines tasting like they used to, So I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think we've been blessed in a lot of wine regions with a lot of very good vintages. So in some ways, even a vintage chart, vintage chart is going to flag out things like 17 Champagne. It's complicated for Pinot Meunier, and especially in the Vallée de la Marne or 21 in parts of Burgundy can be complicated. But again, but 21, the best 21 Burgundies really transcend the vintage a lot, and actually the best 21 were those. So I think the elite producers are kind of moving beyond vintage.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people will disagree with me about that. People who don't like age 2021 Burgundies because they don't have enough oomph, enough punch. But that's a matter of taste.
Do you think that there's maybe a space for more critical review of practices in the vineyards? Or is that kind of challenging to navigate just in terms of producer relationships and things like this? Just seeing more writing on, this producer is, grading them on some sort of scale the way that we do their wines, because it seems, better to go to the start.
Well, they should be related, and they should. There's a line in a very good book. I think in some ways it's one of the best books about wine by other means that I've read. It's by the Percivals, Reinventing the Wheel, about cheese. Not about wine at all, but there are people who clearly like wine and know about wine. So and a lot of the concepts are extensible. And they talk about this narrative versus reality, but then they have a line to the effect that the best narratives are the ones we can taste. And farming is like that. And you don't need the narrative about, very long dry aged, old steer Galician beef is a nice narrative, but then you taste it, it's not. There's no debate. It's not just a story that you're being spun, and it's the same with grape farming. No, I think generally the press firstly needs to go into these things a bit more, and needs to understand these things and take the time. And you can learn this stuff. It's not nobody's too old to learn more about farming and to spend more time in the vineyards and visit people's parcels and try to understand the variables. And then be a bit less afraid to say some stuff, frankly, because I think a lot of as a wine writer, it's very easy to get almost afraid of your own shadow. And people think the other day, you must try to be, you should be careful not to upset too many people on board. I don't care. Really don't care. If the consequence for me is that I'm not allowed to taste wines that I don't like, cry me a river. Really, it's not. What's really the downside? And it's just wine, It happens to be something of incredible importance to me, but it's so important that I'm certainly not prepared to pull punches. And that's not to say to be gratuitously rude, but if somebody is doing a terrible job of farming in Le Marais or something like that, then somebody should say something. And that is our job. So
and it's theirs too. It's not just yours, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'd like to see a bit more of that. And, I'm afraid the wine journalism has this sort of superficial appearance of collegiality, whereby everybody's great work, he's a great this or he's a great that. Actually, the wine writers love nothing better than when another wine writer is banned by property, and they all gleefully sort of comment amongst each other. And they never say, well, in fact, we're all implicated in this, and this is a terrible way to proceed. And you should take criticism on the chin and improve your practices if they're right, or explain why they're wrong if they're wrong. But no, everybody loves it. It's not it's only, as I said, it's only superficially collegiate. But in fact, I think it needs to really be professionalized a little bit, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That's a really good perspective. And I think that it's right that, what you say, it's not in anyone's interest for you to quote unquote pull punches. And it's also the responsibility of the producer to be held to that same standard as well. So I don't, I know we're getting closer to time here, but I don't want to skip over just talking a little bit about English sparkling. That's been something that Billy and I have discussed a little bit on the podcast recently, and interested on, how do you, what sort of reference point do you provide when you're kind of exploring some of these new wines from England? I mean, we don't want to, just like we try not to compare Oregon to Burgundy, try not to compare, England to Champagne, but it's kind of difficult. So what's sort of your approach there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so afraid of those comparisons, honestly, because I think, people planted Pinot Noir in Oregon and started using French oak barrels and French winery names.
Sure.
Burgundian style winemaking, and then Burgundians started investing, and everyone said it was great. So everyone likes the comparisons as long as people don't say, well, it ain't as good as La Tâche or whatever, So as soon as someone makes La Tâche, they're not going to be saying they were trying to make their Sonoma County Pinot, are they? So that's a
good point.
I don't know. Some of that stuff seemed to be a little disingenuous. Again, similarly, I mean, we went to make sparkling wine in the UK because we planted champagne grape varieties in Champenois soils. And use Champenois winemaking, and then when it's not as good, we say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't compare us." So I'm a little skeptical of that. I think you kind of implicitly are, one's comparing everything. I mean, wine tasting is a comparative exercise inherently. It's unavoidable. So I don't really have any problems with that. I think UK is in an interesting spot because production is going up and up. And I just saw for the first time for a little while, sales fell in the last year. They made a big push in the US, and I don't know how much traction that got. And you may have a better perspective on that on that than me, because my feeling is they maybe went a couple of years too soon with a big push for products that were quite expensive. There were a lot of stuff.
There are maybe 3 producers widely distributed.
Yeah,
that I can think of.
There was an attempt a couple of years ago, like just before the pandemic, to push it a bit harder. YGB made quite a push on that. I don't know. I haven't spent enough time visiting vineyards down there to see what people are doing as well as I should. And climatically, it's still not a sure thing to get the kind of ripeness that you might want to do. And I was a little disappointed to see the extent to which a lot of bad practices of champagne viticulture had been adopted in terms of, you take this sort of completely virgin soil that's never had anything grown on it. It's just been meadow-led, and then you start using herbicide under your rows of the vineyard you just planted. It just makes no sense, stuff like that. And there are definitely exceptions to that thankfully. But I think it's still a pretty immature thing. But what's been your experience of what you've tested?
Well, the first experience is that the distribution here to the States is extremely limited and the price point is extremely high. I'm not sure you can really enter there for under $45 or so, I think, probably, which, is...
And there's a lot of
the same
at that
price
point, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's a few that, at least on the West Coast, that you can get for a non-vintage for $30. But like the quality though is there are like I'm at K&L and I'm walking down. There are cavas that in other sparkling from other regions that at that price point you can safely say you're going to get more quality.
Yeah, I think so.
You have to want to drink English sparkling wine.
Yeah.
It can't just be, let me get something sparkling, it doesn't make sense. But I'm super interested in some of these smaller producers that, I have no shot at getting wine from because, it's $300 to ship it and they only make 5 cases.
Right.
It's so minuscule in production, but really interesting.
It would be exciting to see more sort of artisanal stuff. And there's even some interesting things being done in still wine. I had a Chardonnay from Essex that was 14% alcohol, I think.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the ripeness is, at least it's been so. Have you get into all sorts of challenges of craft?
Are they going to call it Coteau de, England?
That would Coteau that would be funny, yeah.
Since Brady got to ask his question, I get to ask mine about Madeira. Are you still kind of, up to speed with what's going on there? Is Tarantes making a comeback? That's my main question because I love it. Yeah. What's going on there? Any updates?
I think that's also a challenging category to review because the sort of glamorous wines and the ones that are most sort of exciting to me are obviously the old wines. And those are kind of, a finite product essentially. I mean, in terms of the way wine is made and farmed and the kind of age of the wines, there's not really very much today that's comparable. And it's a difficult category to review because as I say, you could review these really exciting things and then there are 5 bottles out there or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The wines basically don't exist. Or you can review all the sort of 5-year-old, 10-year-olds, and 15-year-olds, and it's bad for your teeth.
Between the acid and the sugar.
I think there are clearly some exciting things going on, and I admire people trying because it must be such an uphill struggle, and it's the same with people trying to do things in Sauterne or some of these categories of wine that the marketplace is not very receptive to, honestly. I mean, yeah, there's some of these regions I don't even know what the future of them will be. What will Sauterne look like in 50 years? I have no idea.
Do you think, Sauterne is an interesting, I guess Madeira has its own problem with cropping, with like people are planting bananas instead because it's easier to sell some of that stuff. And then in Sauterne,
look, most Madeira is used for cooking wine.
Exactly.
So it's very difficult.
Yeah. Nobody wants, that's why Tarantes doesn't exist. But then also in Sauterne, they've had a number of the bad vintages or like small yielding vintages, I guess you would say. Do you see like that improving with the way that, viticulture is going to have to change with climate change and then they can hold out until the next trend comes and botrytized wines are back in?
I think the challenge for Sauterne is that a lot of people haven't understood what Sauterne is. Right? Sauterne is in many ways the world's most compelling orange wine because botrytis digests the skin of the grapes on the vine. You have a maceration of the skins in the fruit on the vine, complete maceration. The Sauterne must is puree. It's just sludge. When you press it, it's sludge. So you have complete extraction. So Sauterne is one of the only great sweet wines which is based not on acidity versus sweetness, but on bitterness versus sweetness. It's bitterness from the complete botrytized extraction of skins. We're often in the absence of huge amounts of acidity. That's the compelling thing about Sauterne. And now what's the difference between Sauterne and Barsac? Barsac is flat and limestone. So you have low pH from the limestone. And because it's flat, the fog comes in and carpets everything. So you have more botrytis and more acid. Whereas Sauterne is these gravelly croups. So your botrytis is more localized, and you have a higher pH. So it's actually quite simple to understand once you've understood the basics of the topography and the fact that this orange wine. A lot of people there who are trying to make like light Sauterne now because they realize it's not fashionable to make rich Sauterne. But so you're getting Sauterne without enough botrytis. And actually, because it's not got the botrytis, you haven't got the bitterness from the skins. So the wine tastes sweeter, even though there's less sugar. So that's very regrettable. It's kind of like light Sauterne. I was a friend of mine likes this light foie gras, low fat foie gras. It's just a non-starter. But the other really impediment is just the complete like failure as a category from the point of view of serious wine drinkers, not mass market, but of dry white water, right? But the solution to Sauterne's problem is to, do an early pick of everything that's not touched by botrytis and make really good dry Semillon based wines that have real complexity, and then make small quantities of super intense, very botrytized dessert wines later in the season. And not say we'll have this parcel for dry wine and this parcel for dessert wine. You need to do a negative tree, where you go through first, you make your dry wine from everything that's not rotten, right?
It's almost like the
people are making.
Almost like the Tokai model there. Like maybe they'll have to go to a Ganazu type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a traditional way of doing it in Bordeaux for that matter in the 19th century and into the 20th. But with the advent of this sort of, cat urine scented Sauvignon dominated sort of international style of dry white Bordeaux, thanks to Denis Derbaudieu in the 80s and 90s with enzymatic processes and very cool fermentations and particular selected yeast and things to make this sort of New Zealand style Sauvignon Blanc, right? But make it in Bordeaux. Dry white Bordeaux was immediately killed as a category for people who like to drink things like, Mercer. Whereas if you drink old, before that, dry white Bordeaux was Semillon based, not very aromatic wines with huge amounts of texture and sapidity and bitterness that compensated for the lack of acidity, which meant there were super interesting food wines and, like old Briand or even like old Carbon. We're talking not that long. We're talking like 1979, for example, or even 82, those sorts of years. And after that, it just went in a completely different stylistic direction. Because of that category is dead. So no one's interested in dry white Bordeaux. So these Sauterne estates try to save themselves by making some dry wine, and no one's interested. So they come over, the lifeline is gone. So they to save Sauterne, not only do you need to make Sauterne more Sauterne, but you need to also figure out how to interest people in great dry white Bordeaux. Is that ever going to happen? I don't know. I mean, you can say it's that like that, but I don't see that ever happening. I'm afraid. So you'll continue to have sweet wines that don't sell and sort of Sauvignon Blanc style dry Sauterne that doesn't sell very well. And you'll find it and close out in French supermarkets and things like that, which is a real pity because it's some of the most. Whenever I go there, I kind of want to buy a vineyard. It's really it's so special. There was, it's really tempting, but then you're just like, wow, better not.
Speaking of you buying a vineyard and producing wine, what's the best way to get a hold of your wines in the States?
Well, we do have less imported, so Savage Liquor Bricks is bringing them in, but there's not very much. And I try to be as discreet about it as possible because I'm not trying to use my journalistic platform to promote my but they do kind of exist, and we have to sell some basically to pay for the cost of making more, right? Yeah, and it's extraordinary. So we installed AC in the cellar this year, for example. That's more and more important. And you can't imagine how much you think it costs installing AC in the cellar in Pommard.
Yeah.
So that was kind of why we had to sell some wines,
Well, Billy and I use our podcasting platform to acquire wines that we couldn't get elsewhere, so we'll connect with you.
But come to Burgundy, we can open some bottles as well. That's always,
of course,
always the best way.
Well, thank you so much, William, for joining us and providing your insight across all of these regions. I think that continue to push the boundaries and challenge some of these producers to keep doing things the right way. I think that's good for everyone.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right. I hope everybody enjoyed that interview with William Kelley. It was really exciting to have him on. We've had a couple really respected people in the industry, including some MWs, say that he was their favorite kind of critic to read due to his approach, looking at structure and kind of just breaking down the wines in terms of his reviews. But also, I think it's really interesting how much he takes the vineyard and the winemaking into account and all of that as well. I think it's just a really thoughtful approach to wine criticism. And it was really exciting to talk to him. Really kind of approach that would be close to my heart. So thank you everybody for listening this week. And we'll be back with another interview next week. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.